Hi, this is Graham Palfery-Smith. I'm going to talk to you today about, it's a bit of a strange title, I'll admit, planning an exit or exit curious. And the reason we went for that title is, there's a lot of people who are very clear that they want to sell their business. There are quite a few people out there who sort of think they might want to, that's the curious bit. And then there's also quite a few people who don't want other people to know that they're thinking about selling their business. So we thought if they were just exit curious, they could still come in and know. So we will assume nothing from the people in the room. Just to tell you a little bit about how, why I'm here. For those of you that don't know, my previous business was Broadbean Technology. We started that business back in 2002. Over the next 6 years, got it up to be the world's leading job posting business. We sold it to Mail Group in 2008 for a fairly lengthy due diligence process, which I'm going to talk a little bit more on later. Subsequently did a 2-year earnout, then left the business, made some private investments, major investments in other recruitment-related tech companies such as Ebsta. We then just recently been through a round of fundraising for that business. And also my current business, which is Cube19, which is a vision analytics company, which I started about a year and a half ago. And we just went through a round of funding on that business as well. We just raised £1.1 million from a bunch of investors. So that's why I'm here.
And good morning, or yes, still just about. My name is McGuire and Graham Palfery-Smith. I've been in the recruitment industry for over 30 years and have been involved in a number of mergers and acquisitions, transactions in that time, management buyouts, management buy-ins, flotations, trade sales and so on across the world. And I am currently non-exec director for a number of businesses, one of which is Dan's business, Cube19. We're also involved together with Ebsta and a couple of other things. And I work largely with recruitment businesses or businesses allied to the recruitment industry, working towards, in the main, working towards an exit. I've got a business in the States, for example, that's selling Q1 next year, which we've been working on for the last 4 years, 4+ years, to get ready for sale. So hopefully we know a little bit about this. This is, I have to say, the first time that we've ever done a presentation together. We've spoken before or after each other several times, but it's the first time we've ever done one together, so I'm hoping it's going to be more Morecambe and Wise than Rod Hull and Emu. There's a cultural difference as well as an age difference here. Not putting my foot hand anywhere near me. Right, so we're going to try and keep this as informal as possible, and because we've got a relatively small group, if you want to ask a question or you're not sure about something or you've said something you think is utterly ridiculous, which is quite possible, then please just shout out, stick your hand up, guffaw, something, just interrupt us. We're very happy to have discussion. We've got plenty of time to play with, so if you want to say something, please do. In terms of getting ready to sell, a lot of this stuff is very dry, so we're going to try and make it hopefully as light-hearted, as interesting as possible. One of the first things you have to do is make sure you've got a plan. You've got to develop a plan and agree an exit strategy, agree that you're actually going to do it. I mean, you've got to be realistic about where you are, because if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're starting your journey, you don't know how you're going to get to the end point. You can always pick an ending, but you can't. You've got to determine exactly where you are. You've got to be realistic about that before you start. In terms of agreeing an exit strategy, you've got some thoughts on that, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say that you should plan your exit before you start. I don't agree with that in the slightest. You know, this is what happened in the dot-com boom, is people run these brilliant plans, go out and raise a ton of funding on this plan that you're supposed to exit for however much later on, and then never kind of make it out the first year. But what I do say is that you should plan that you may exit at some point. Ideally, decide that you're either going to exit or you're not. And we're not going to get into the whole difference between a lifestyle business and one that's being built for value. I hope everybody in this room understands the importance of that. But it's about deciding that if you are planning to sell a business, you make a lot of different decisions if you're not planning to sell it. And when we started Broadbean, we didn't really think about what we were going to do, if we were going to sell it or not. And we had to do a ton of hard work later. So one of the things we're going to do today is try and give you some of those points to avoid. But I guess the most important thing about it is to take it seriously. if you decide that you're building a business for exit, whether you're just starting or whether you've been running for a few years and you're planning and selling, take it seriously, because the decisions that you make should be with your goal in mind. If your goal is sell your business, you will make fundamentally different decisions. So if your goal is make enough money to go on holidays every year, and I think that's the kind of point about taking it seriously.
And also, staffing. I mean, one of the things you've got to do, we've got a plan, and Dan will talk a bit more later on about succession planning and actually making sure you've got the right people there, because we have slightly different views on some parts of this topic, earn-outs being one of them. But staff according to your plan and make sure key staff get it. I mean, that's one of the things.
Yeah, I think, and actually, and there's some of my management team from the days of Broadbean sitting right here, so we'll be able to vouch for this, but...
Or not.
Or not. So, we felt at the time, because we kind of grown the business to be growing quite quickly, and we'd never really made it clear to people all the time that we were planning on selling the business somewhere, because actually we didn't really know. What we didn't have is people that really got it, were kind of incentivised and tied and bought into this journey of building a business for exit. What we kind of sold them on was we were a really cool tech company, it's going to be a great place to work, and we were all in together. And when we got to the point where we were going to, we got an offer in, we suddenly actually felt a bit like we were almost cheating our staff, because it was like, well, they've worked really hard for us on this, and now they don't know what's going on. And it's much, much easier, and certainly with my current business and the other businesses that I'm involved with, make sure that the staff are really kind of bought in on that long-term journey. So if you're clear that you're going to sell, you will work out who your key staff are, and who you want to come on that journey with you, and make sure that they all get it, they're all incentivised, they're all tied in, and you're all kind of going in the same direction. That's a really key point. It's not essential that you do it. It would have made my life a hell of a lot easier if it hadn't have been a few months into the process when I'd taken 4 or 5 of them into a room and sort of said, don't tell everyone this, but it's something to know.
The first MBO I did, was in the early 90s, and the then MD, my partner at the time, was absolutely adamant that nobody in the company should know apart from the key team, which was a dozen or so. And so everything we had to do had to be done in evenings and weekends. And we'll talk a bit later on about how hard this is, how much hard work it actually is. But at that time, I wasn't allowed to tell anybody, and because it was deemed in those days, if you told people you were interested in selling your business, even to the person who was effectively running it, who everybody knew, then people might leave. Now, the attitudes, I'm pleased to say, in the last 20 years has changed somewhat, and now it's common for people to talk about exiting their business. 20 years ago, if you had a conference like this, you wouldn't have this sort of title, and you wouldn't want to be seen in this room. It'd be a bit like a candidate having a accountancy candidate who used to come to Bain and Clark when we had the same offices as KPMG. I mean, they couldn't be seen walking in through our door for obvious reasons, because everyone knew they were coming for a job. But now it's a completely different thing. It's just perfectly understandable to set a business up as Dan has with Q and explain to people from the get-go that we're building this for an exit. That's perfectly understandable. In recruitment companies, certainly 20 odd years ago, it wasn't the case. And it was viewed as a negative rather than a positive.
And one of the things about it as well is that it's important when you make this decision to think like a buyer. And when you're running a small and medium-sized business, there's a lot of things that you do that kind of reflect the fact it's your business. You've got a credit card, is it the company card or your card? That sort of stuff. But you need to think like a buyer. When a buyer's looking at it, are they going to look back at the things you've done, the decisions you've made, and be pleased about it, which if they are, probably adds to the value, or be displeased, which probably takes away from the value. And I've just gone through this recently myself. I funded the business for the first 18 months, ran it kind of, just did whatever, and then raised the money, and all of a sudden now I'm looking at every little cost, and it's, someone else's money now, and I know that they've got an expectation of me, which whatever point we come to an exit, those buyers will also have an expectation.
You also got on your board for, as non-execs, for ex-chief execs of PLCs. The next point I want to talk a little bit about, because it is very important, is choosing advisors. To get a group of advisors, the assumption is that you're going to exit at some point. You need to get your ducks in a row as early as possible. Getting to know potential corporate finance advisor, accountancy, taxation advisors, and legal advisors as early as possible is very useful. Take recommendations from people you know who've done this already. And take recommendations on specific people, not just the firm. Oh, we used X firm and they were really good. Well, who did you use specifically? Because believe me, the quality of output from some of the people in the same firm can vary wildly. And I can recommend individuals, I've done a lot of transactions within firms who are really, really good, but within the same firm, I wouldn't let you touch someone with a barge pole. So you do need to take recommendations specifically on individuals and interview them. We'll talk a little bit later on about some jargon, because it usually makes me smile, hopefully it'll make you smile as well. But one of the bits of jargon that I came across very early on is beauty parade, which you may well be familiar with because we use it now in the recruitment industry in terms of when we go to see clients. Do interview your advisors. Don't be blown away by the fact that they've got huge amounts of experience and they've done so many deals and they're going to charge you ridiculous pounds per hour. Actually spend some time with them, because you're going to be in a relationship with these people for months and possibly longer. So make sure that you get to know them quite well, and it's somebody that you appreciate going to be happy working with, and vice versa, of course. Don't assume that it's just going to work because you've been told they're very good, especially with lawyers. The lawyer's a key relationship.
Yeah, if you can build a relationship with your lawyers, your accountants, and your tax advisors for a period before you sell, it will make your life a lot easier. We went into this process with, we use kind of small firms, small local accountants, small law firm, frauds and sods, mainly because we wanted to keep costs down. Had we really been clear in the years leading up to exit that was what we wanted to do, we would have built a relationship with people who are actually M&A specialists. And to give you an idea, our legal fees when we did the deal, we kind of went here and we said, we're looking at selling this business, and we did a beauty parade, and we saw three sets of lawyers, and they all gave us around about, it's going to cost you about somewhere between 40 and 60 grand. And one of them said, well, if you want, we'll do you a flat fee, 50 grand. If the deal goes through, even if it takes longer, it's 50 grand, but if it doesn't, you still have 50 grand. And of course, it's probably going to go through, but they did say 40 to 60, didn't they? I'm sure I heard that. So obviously, being an optimistic entrepreneur, you only hear 40, and our legal fees ended up being about 120. And people look at it, M&A lawyers, M&A, people have got experience of tax and M&A. They'll be more expensive. But you don't have to use them for absolutely everything, but building a relationship as you go, so that when you get to the point where you're going to do a deal with these people, it's like now, I use the same lawyers now that I used for the DMGT exit. And I've got such a good relationship, I can call him up, in our last fundraising, I was calling him up sometimes at 11, 12 o'clock at night, because I needed a bit of advice or whatever, and I didn't get a bill for it. So actually, the longer you have a relationship with people, the more value for money you get. And tax advice, it's actually much better to plan for tax as you go, far in advance, than it is to try and work out the best way to get around it at the time. We'll talk a bit more about tax specifically later. The other advisors, and if anything, perhaps the most important of all, is your non-execs, your chairman, or the people that are going to advise you on the board. They should be, actually, just make one follow-up just on the lawyers and accountants. Don't use your mates. Just don't. Because
or your family.
Well, especially
no
your
mates.
family.
No,
the thing with family as well is that family care about you, especially if it's, a lot of people use their mums or dads are accountants or lawyers. These people's first job is to protect you as a child. And things like M&A can get quite scary and can get quite risky, and you don't want someone that is more worried about how much risk you're taking on than actually giving you the right advice. So please don't use family, and don't use, the amount of times recently we've been doing stuff, sometimes I'm just looking at my mate to look over the contract. And this bloke wasn't an M&A lawyer, he was just a lawyer, and he sort of run through, and that's where problems can happen.
You've had that recently went on for months and months and months and months.
Use
tiny amount of money involved.
This goes back to the point, if you're serious about it, you'll do it. If you're unsure, then there's no point spending all this money if you're not going to expect it. It's about making that decision really important. But the non-execs, so we had non-execs at Broadbean, we brought them in about 18 months before we sold, I guess. One of them was Anne Swain, Chief Exec of Ebsta. One of them was Les Clark, who was the guy that built Glotel. And they were just brilliant. They brought some real structure to the board, and they helped us be very clear about what our objectives were. So when I come in and talk about some new initiative, and they would bring me back, is this going to help you sell your business? Be very clear on it. And you want people who've been there and done it. A lot of people get some non-exec on their board who's a blogger or someone they used to work with, or get a non-exec who actually if you're selling your business, your non-exec should be people who've sold businesses, and ideally sold businesses that are similar to yours, or for a higher amount than what yours went for, so that you've got somebody that can add some real value. And they'll help you with finding the right lawyers and the right accountants. That's how I found mine. Les Clark introduced me to the guys who handled the Glotel exit. And you know, to put it into perspective, I had 2 people on the board there, went through what was a very successful exit, have then been through investing, raising money myself, and I still now have got 4 people on my board who have either floated businesses or exited. So I've got twice the amount of people now advising me, even though I already know how big it's myself. Because I'm thinking bigger this time, and I want people who've already thought bigger and been bigger. And that's just, people ask about non-execs, and you know, if you haven't got one and you think about selling your business, go get one straight away.
I heartily endorse that, by the way.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah, please do.
With non-execs, and we work with a couple, do you advocate having different non-execs with the business at different points of the scale? So when you start to sort of mid-term, your mid-term strategy?
It depends what, if you're starting a business, as Cube's been started, with a view to exiting within a relatively short period, then you need to start with people that have done exits. You need to work with people that have done transactions. If you're starting a business and you want somebody with particular expertise in a technical area, discipline, finance is a classic, then you need to get somebody like that. But it varies from company to company, and I've talked to a lot of businesses who think they want a non-exec because they want to do something, but they don't really want to do something. Dan said earlier on, you've got to take it seriously. This whole area, you take your business seriously, one presumes. Most people I've met run businesses do. If you're thinking seriously about exiting, then you've got to take it very seriously. And part of that is to have the right people around you, getting advisors that have done deals before. So not your mate who happens to be a lawyer, or your dad, or your mum, whatever, who has never done a transaction. Get somebody that does transactions every day of the week. And also having non-execs to advise you that can make you better. They can fill in the gaps in your particular experience. So it will vary, and long term, if you take a business that goes through the traditional old style cycle of building up as a private company, becoming a public company, and then developing, which has happened with a few recruitment companies. And if you look at the non-execs that say Michael Page had in 78, 0. 81, 82, yes, they had one, and very specific to the industry, very specific industry experience. Became public the first time, names, lords and ladies, basically. Well, not ladies in the case of Michael Page, obviously. Lords, and MPs and that sort of thing. And then they moved on. When they went to the Americans, all the non-execs went away. When they refloated, they got another board of lords again. So it varies depending on what the requirements are of each individual business.
There's one more point on that is there are a lot of people out there. I'm not going to mention names, but I can think of a good few who have kind of like built one business, sold it, spent the next 20 years talking about it, and getting paid. You know, like a non-exec costs you anywhere between 10, 12, and 25 grand a year. And these people will turn up, you know, sort of swanning for a board meeting, dole out some advice, not really listen to what they say, and clear off to their next board meeting. And that's all they do, all board meetings, and they get paid a ton of money for it. And it's a lot of them that are just kind of doing it because that's their job now. They sold a business and now their job is to be a non-exec or an advisor. What you really want, if you plan on selling the business, is to have somebody who's got some skin in the game. So ideally, and all of the people on my board are all investors, and they've all put a decent amount of money in. So they're in, as much as I am, they've invested their own cash. And as one way to sort of sit around the table, they're not thinking about getting on to the next meeting, they're thinking about how to manage their own shares. And either they put their own money in, or you give them some kind of small percentage for working in, effectively working for free. And if they help you achieve objectives, they'll get something at the end of it. That's a far, far better way to do it. It's not saying that you shouldn't necessarily, you may pay them as well. If they're just these people, if all they do is get paid roles, they've got no equity in investing.
So there's one other point I'll say about non-execs, because there are a few people in the recruitment sector who do this, And it depends on what the requirements of the business are. If you want somebody who's done exits, then ideally somebody that's done more than one, and not one that was done 20 years ago, which actually he didn't run anyway. That's another story entirely. But equally, if you want your sales force trained, then there are a couple of good non-execs out there that are trainers. I mean, get them on board. You know, Mike Walmsley, Alex Arnott, those sort of people. And these are guys who are really good trainers, and they're experienced non-execs. Get them in if that's what you need. If you need your management developed or your sales force trained, and it's a longer term plan, then fine, get those sorts of people, and that's what you should do. So it's horses for courses, I suppose.
Yeah, just have to have one. So maybe
exactly.
Someone that's like that.
And it doesn't have to be every month. I mean, it can be, you know, for some of the companies I work with, I see them every quarter. And depending on what they want to do, it's a longer term play with some of them. I mean, we're talking several years with some. And the American one is 5 years, or will be just over 5 years when we finish it. In every deal that you do, there are going to be ups and downs, hence the roller coaster. That is a fact, it happens. I was told very early on, I'm having lunch actually today with a guy that I did the very first deal with. He did our first purchase for us. He was a corporate finance guy at Storytime at the time. Then he helped me with the MBO, which I did a year or so later. And he said to me, you need to expect that there will be really downtime. So you're euphoric at the moment, you've got this, you do this deal, you're going to do this fantastic thing. Needless to say, I was a recruitment consultant in my 30s, so I ruled the world. It was going to be easy, obviously it was going to be easy. It isn't, and there are times when you do think, I don't know why I'm doing this, I don't think I can do this anymore. There are some really seriously down times, if you're not careful. Be prepared for it. It happens to everybody. It's a very emotional thing. I mean, one of the things that people don't talk about in these sorts of discussions or conferences, which Dan and I decided we were definitely going to put in.
This is where we get deep.
It's psychological. Is, I mean, I put in my notes, only those with immense fortitude can actually do a deal. If you're fragile emotionally, and you will know you are, or you're in the least bit paranoid and you actually care what other people think about you, then don't do it. Or get somebody else in your organisation to lead the whole thing for you. Because I had a deal, I bought a lot of businesses for 510, I bought 6 businesses for 510, it would have been 7. But 9 days before we were due to close, I got a phone call from this particular business, a European business. It's a substantial deal, it was 32 million euros, most of which was his, he owned 80% of the business. So it was staring down the barrel of losing 20-odd million euros. And he effectively said, I think you guys are trying to screw me, and I don't trust you anymore. And I said, well, if you feel that way, you're going to have to pull the deal. We can't do this. And we'd spent a good part of about 8 months on this. 9 days before we pulled out of it. This guy was as fragile emotionally as you could get. He'd been through the ringer, despite all the things I told him, I'm on the other side, which I was. His advisors, Katie Folwell-Davis, one of the best in the business, if not the best, from the accountancy firms. She rang me the day before he rang me and said, I've lost control of him. I just can't, he won't listen, he will not listen, he's just obsessed. He's completely paranoid. Now, he had those character flaws, if I can call them that. They might be beneficial in some creative arts, perhaps, but not in recruitment. He had those flaws beforehand. He would have known that, as indeed would several of the people around him. And he should never have done the deal, or should have given it to a very capable MD who should have run the deal for him. And he would have had the deal done, he would bank the money, and be off living in France, wherever it was he wanted to move to. So, if you do think you can't cope with that, if you struggle to cope with the day-to-day problems of running your business, you shouldn't be thinking about exiting seriously, because it is tough. It is tough.
And you know, also, it goes to your personal life. There's always going to be stuff that happens that was unexpected. There's also a lot of stuff in your life which can cause you a lot of stress, which you know is going on. So you ideally don't want to be selling your business while you are in some sort of marital spat, or a divorce, or if you know you've got a child about to be born, or you know, even things like sick relatives, stuff like that, that actually is going to massively play on your mind emotionally. Because I mean I'll give you a kind of example as well from the Broadbean exit. So I had 2 partners, Kel and Brad. Kel was, actually still is to this day, one of my best friends, and he decided he definitely wanted to sell. And I decided I definitely didn't. So the deal was never going to happen, and they wanted both of us to stay on post-deal, so it wasn't going to work if one of us wasn't interested. And we decided that we would have a kind of heart-to-heart about it. And you know, he told me that I've got a wife and kids, and this is, you know, something that will secure my future, and you know, right, fair enough. I'm a young man in my 20s, I'm single, I love what I do, you know, I'm not interested in selling at this point. So this kind of then went on to the point where two best friends who'd worked together brilliantly for 5 or 6 years couldn't even talk to each other. We had to be in a whole week, right, look, let's just stay out of each other's way. And in the end, we, fortunately, I didn't have any, you know, my life was pretty stable, but the stress that can come from that kind of situation, because you don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to sell it, are we not? Me and Kel are going to sort things out. If we don't sell, how are we going to work together? That kind of stuff. It's really difficult. We actually sat down in a room together and we said, all right, look, I'm going to explain my reasons to you why I think we shouldn't. You explain your reasons to me why you think we should. We'll go over the weekend, whatever happens, we'll shake hands on Monday and we'll try and make a decision. I went away and decided actually his arguments are very good and that we should sell. He went away and decided from my argument that we shouldn't sell. And so we started again.
Didn't stay for another week.
Yeah. And the other part about going through a deal is that, especially if you know, I mean, I was in love with my business. It defined me as who I was. And without it, you know, I was thinking, well, what if it's gone? That's money. I won't have children and stuff to do to me. I'm not, you know, like a child. I always thought of it like a child at the time. Now I sort of think of it as an ex-girlfriend I'm on very good terms with. I remember sitting there thinking, I'm not sure. Before we kind of decided to actually do it, I'm not sure. Really good reasons to sell, really good reasons not to sell. There's no point asking your parents because, you know, if you tell them sums of, you know, if you tell your friends the sums of money involved, they just go do it. And if you tell your parents, they freak out, you know, and they just start trying to protect you, and all the rest of it kind of falls away. So you can't talk to them, you can't talk to anyone close to you. You might have your advisors, but your advisors are at the point of, I can't advise you whether to do it or not. You need to make that decision yourself. And the only person that really understands it, if you've got one, is your business partner, who at that point you're not talking to. I was sitting in my office, you know, I must have spent hours at a time just looking blankly, you know, trying to work out how to do it. And you know, if you've got that going on, it can be all-consuming. And you know, anyone that's ever had difficulties in a relationship knows how all-consuming that can be. Or you know, people that haven't had any kids yet, but any people that have got children or young children, how all-consuming that can be. You can't do it all. So if you can, whatever you can do to kind of put yourself in a solid emotional state before you go into this is a really, really good idea. And I've never heard anyone say this kind of stuff in the, you know, in a kind of talk about M&A or exits, but mindset of being right for it, kind of mentally and emotionally, is probably the most important thing.
So, avoiding potholes. Just one final point on that. It's a simple thing like holidays. I bought a business called EMR 3 or 4 years ago, and the principal of that business went on a 3-week holiday about 3 months into the transaction, which was a massive problem, especially as he told me before he went that he wouldn't be contactable. He was contactable, and I did make sure I contacted him every single day to make him pay for the pain he was putting everybody else through in his business and on our side, because he decided he wanted to take a holiday in the middle of the transaction. It's a simple thing like that. The big personal, emotional stuff, definitely don't do. But even, don't plan a big holiday if you're trying to do a transaction. You need to be focused on this 12 hours a day, realistically.
The other thing with distractions is if you haven't told your staff, or at least your key staff, you've got another potential issue there, and DC and Claire may well remember this. So Kel and I didn't particularly ever go to meetings together. They ran a different part of the business to me. So then, and we didn't used to wear suits to work. So then all of a sudden we've got this kind of, you know, big meeting with D&D and lawyers. We both come in suited up, you know, and I was like, that's a bit weird. And then we walk out of the office together, so people start looking around. And after about 2 or 3 meetings, people started to wonder what was going on. We had to start doing, you know, avoidance tactics, you know. So I'd come into the office with Kel and we'd meet there, or Kel would come in and he'd leave 10 minutes before, and I'd talk about some lunch I was going to. Then you end up lying to your staff, and you know, you can spend as much time working out how to not get busted as you can actually doing the deal. So you can be in a position where your staff are, you know, kind of clear about what's going on, and they can also, can you handle other stuff from it? Because going through a transaction of any kind takes away so much of your time. You can't actually do your job. And what you need is the support of other people in your business who understand what's going on and can take that kind of slack for you, rather than you trying to do your job and do all this stuff in spare time.
That is the biggest distraction, is forgetting that you've got a business to run, forgetting you've got a day job. And often, I've seen it happen several times, unfortunately. First deal I ever did for TMP, I bought a dozen companies for TMP, but the very first one took 14 months to do, and we ended up paying a third of what we'd originally offered, because the owner of the business, who was also one of the principal fee makers, had his eyes so much off the ball and had these pound notes in his mind and his eyes, wasn't particularly well advised. And obviously we're on the other side, so even though I can see it happening, I can see his business is dissipating, because I was seeing his weekly numbers, ended up getting, as I say, a lot less. So make sure that if you can't keep your eye on the business yourself, you've got somebody who can. I was very lucky working with a guy called Chris Hermanson when we did the float for HW Group. And Chris effectively ran the business through the 6.5 months that we were doing that transaction on a day-to-day basis. And that, if I hadn't had him there, then we would have had serious problems getting that float away. So a couple of other practical tips and how to avoid potholes. Read everything, especially if you're the chief exec. If you're the lawyer, the GC, general counsel within the firm, then obviously it's your job to do that. But if you are the managing director or the CEO and you're leading, you're the lead for the principal, you're a principal within the transaction, make sure you've read everything. It takes huge amounts of time, and you will learn words you didn't even know existed, which you'll never ever see again outside a contract. But you do need to understand what they mean, and that's why you have your own lawyer, and that's why there are dictionaries. You need to understand. There's absolutely no point in making assumptions. Well, I thought that meant that. Or I assumed that when they spoke to me about that, that's what would be in the contract. No, read the contract. Very rare these days, especially with professional advisors, that you will get anybody trying to push through a fast one. But I have seen them. In the 510 transactions, one of them, which remain nameless, the owner tried to put through a fast one, which fortunately I had a really eagle-eyed finance guy who picked it up off a bank statement on the day of completion. There's a 300 grand difference, which in the scale of multi-million pound deals is not that much, but I'd rather I had the 300 grand than the vendor nicked it, which is, so make sure you read everything. And if you're not sure, ask the questions, and don't worry about embarrassing yourself. You're not embarrassing yourself. You've never done this before. I still ask questions which potentially are embarrassing. I don't care. I want to know. I need the information. So make sure that you've got all the information, and if you don't know, ask.
You know, people talk about signing their life away. You actually are.
Yeah.
It could well be, and you're going to sign this, and if something's not right with it, no matter how good your advisors were, if you didn't ask the question, or left something to chance, it's only on you. And this is one of the reasons why it takes so long. Some of the SPAs, the deal documents that you can get, can be hundreds of pages long, full of jargon. And I spent, one reason why I'm leaving 365, I spent so long sitting there, turning the page. You must have turned the page, I could probably recited it for so many times, but understanding what every single term and clause meant. Because a lot of it is actually things that you're guaranteeing. We'll talk about that in a second, but personally guaranteeing things and what you told them is all accurate. And if they've got a clause saying you told us this, later on find it, they can sue you for the money back. So you can actually sign your company away and lose your money afterwards.
And after you've spent it as well, which is even more embarrassing. Another thing in terms of practical tips is learn some jargon. Does anybody know what bum sniffing is in the M&A sense? And I hasten to add, you know when dogs meet and they circle each other, this is their way of getting to know the other dogs, called bum sniffing. Well, in M&A terms, that's basically the early meetings between the vendor and the purchaser, and obviously there might be several of those, there might be several aspects. Another one which I was told when I did the MBO, my chairman at the time, my non-exec, said, we're going to go along and meet 3i, who were then the leaders in private equity in the sector, and we're going to have a fireside chat. I thought that sounds quite nice, fireside chat, quite cosy. Well, it's not. It was like a fireside grilling. Don't expect that the words that they're using mean exactly what they say. They don't take them literally. It's a formal presentation. Every aspect of the business was ripped apart in front of them, and I had to justify and define everything, which wasn't what I was expecting. So learn what the jargon means, and again, if you don't know, ask. And a couple of other things. Die in a ditch, which is one of my favourites. I'm not going to die in a ditch over that. which is the opposite to deal breaker, which Dan will talk a little bit more about in a moment. And the other thing is chipping. If you hear the word chipping at any stage, that's a price thing. One or two people in the room smile at that one. When you're partway through a transaction and the people buying your business are finding ways of knocking bits and pieces off the price. That's called chipping, and it's not good. And very important point you need to make about tax, which is not about jargon, but
yeah, we talked about tax advice earlier. Bad tax advice can cost you, millions, and it's no exaggeration to say that, particularly at the moment, the tax system is changing fairly frequently. So when we actually were trying to do the Broadbean deal before they abolished taper relief, which was 10% capital gains. Wasn't going to happen, walked away, and then come back to it a few months later. We were sitting down with these tax advisors, and I won't go into the details, but we had a decision to make on how and when to pay tax. That was going to have an implication on how much money we need to take out of the business right now to pay the tax bill when we're going to get it later and pay it later. And I said to the tax accountant, how often does this thing change? Well, it's just changed. It probably won't change again for a few years now. Well, of course, this is end of 2008. Then entrepreneurs relief changed again. They've been kicked off about lower capital gains tax rate, and then Labour changed it again. The Tory government came in and changed it again. And we, at the point we were actually leaving our own out, the tax system changed so much that the original tax advice we were with, the advice was completely invalid. We kind of taken the advice at the time and assumed that was good to go. And I was getting the shock of my life. I knew I was leaving, so I thought about nice holiday, so I was on holiday. Last night, a very brilliant vacation, and I got a call from Kel saying, we've got a problem. Because of the way we've done things, our tax bill is tripling. Tripling. Now that's money that I kind of, was it,
you spent.
We spent. And so then we had to go back, and we were fortunate that we caught it. We'd actually left the business. If I'd left the business 3 months later, my tax bill would have stayed tripled. There was absolutely nothing to be done about it. Fortunately, I was able to get some more tax advice, which cost a lot of money, restate my tax return for the previous year, and I was just within the window, and it brought it down. So instead of paying 10%, I ended up paying 15%, but it was very only 30%. So 15% seemed like a win at the time. And that was because I've not continued to take tax advice. Now, having someone that you know who can call you up and say, the tax system has changed, here's the information, or it's going to change, here's what's going to change. These are fundamentally different decisions that you may make. And, no one likes paying tax, and if you do a transaction, the tax bill is going to be pretty hefty as it is. And sensible tax planning is so worth it. So worth it. Not from your mates and accountant.
So when things go wrong, and they will, very, very simple piece of advice. Don't panic or become paranoid. Take advice, that's why you're paying people. That's why you've got non-execs around you. That's why you've gathered this group of advisors around you, however small it might be, and get straight back in the boat. I wanted to get a picture, I have used a picture of New York flooded from, I think it was Independence Day or something like that, and frozen and flooded. It was a bit too close to home, so I changed it to a picture of London. I'm sorry about that. As we've had floods in New York recently. And the other thing about, remember, this is business.
Yeah, don't take it personally. In fact, at Broadbean, we ended up putting this on the wall at sales floor. It's nothing personal, because you need to have direct conversations with people. And actually, far more than internal conflicts, you're on the opposite side of the table. So you're both trying to get the best deal, and people will have tactics, and and at times it can seem like they're trying to screw you over. Sometimes they might be. Most of the time they're not. Most people are pretty decent about it. But if you start taking it personally, and you think people are out to get you, and screw you, and not just get the best deal for the company, you can lose the plot. And I actually had it with one that I was working on, where someone on their side took it so personally, she started crying at me. I don't know if that was a tactic, but we had to actually go out and have a straight over lunch and say, I'm not actually trying to be rude or whatever, I'm just trying to make sure that I get the best deal for my business and my shareholders. And so many people, Graham talked about some examples earlier, people take it personally. But business is business, you've got to have a thick skin. And if you haven't, try and recognise if you haven't.
So does your approach vary whether you're selling in a way,
or selling and working individually going forward? Relationship.
It's a very good question.
That's a very good question. We're going to come to that.
Yeah, because, you know, if you're going to end up working together, and then this is why nothing personal is really important, because if it's personal, if it's, we've got to work together, but I think this guy's a real arsehole, that's, that's a major problem. That could be a deal breaker. This is about a little bit more later. This is where your advisors come in, and at times, because the guys that are doing immediately the deal was done, we were on the same team. So we sort of sometimes remind ourselves that, like, look, we're technically all on the same, nearly all on the same side, so let's just make sure this is all amicable and we get the deal done. But if you've got good advisors, and a lot of people go off and they'll get a broker or something, waste a load of money on somewhere to facilitate the transaction. If you've got a good advisor on your board, someone who's been through an A before, just let them step in. So then they can kind of, good cop, bad cop, and actually, kill the money for it. In fact, we, one time, it was getting a bit kind of hairy between us and DMGT, so we registered the domain name, remembered that you wanted to buy us.com and started sending them emails from that. Which I think is what led to the wall of crying. But just to sort of lighten it up a little bit, and then sort of, so sort of say, we're all going to be working together soon. Just kind of remember we all try to do this together. But that, that's where the advisors really come in, because if it gets a bit like that, you can just send someone else in, and kind of, especially if there's difficult points. Some people are a bit uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable firing somebody, you don't want to be negotiating the fine points of the contract with somebody else, your lawyer or your advisor doing that before.
So some last few minutes of a few takeaways for you. First thing we talked about earlier on, have a plan. Make sure you've got a plan, and make sure it's realistic, not idealistic. There's no point in something. A number of people I've met over the years have said, well, obviously, if I get a silly offer, I'll sell my business. Don't assume there are going to be mud punters out there. There might be occasionally. I have met a few in the past, but they're very few and far between. And it's the whole M&A market, especially in our sector, is getting much more sophisticated. So don't assume there are mud punters out there. Assume that you'll get what will be a fair price for your business. So make sure your plan is realistic, as I say, not idealistic. And earnouts.
Yeah.
This is where we're slightly disagree.
So look, most of the stories you hear about earnouts are the worst thing that can ever happen to you, and that you'll never see the amount you're supposed to get at the end. Whatever you get on day one to be all you're going to get, and expect to have this horrible falling out. And I when I spoke to 5 or 6 people I knew that had been through earnouts, and almost said, just don't do it. Do not do it. For business, they won't buy the business without you in it. Carry on building it, but someone else is MD and you can all time. But I spoke to people at DMGT who've done earnouts, and most of and you can look at people like Keith Potts, on his job site, he's still there about 9 years after he sold his business on a kind of everlasting earnout. DMGT were a great company to work with. Earnouts can work. In fact, I made 4 or 5 times the amount when I walked away as I made on day one. That doesn't happen for a lot of people, but we were working with a good company. There was a lot of people in our business that said they're really good to work with. That's the thing you want to do. If it's a company that's never done an earnout before, be really well with it, because my experience of talking to other people who have done it, that's normally where it goes wrong. It's either it's their first time trying to do it because they couldn't really afford to do the deal at once, or if they've done earnouts with people and they're not still there, or you can't get hold of them for a conversation, then don't do it.
That's not very good. Yeah, there are some businesses that are very holistic businesses, Medical Selection, for example, where they always did earnouts or partial earnouts, and actually they work very well. My views are slightly different, largely because if you ask Dan has obviously done a successful earnout, ask him if he'd ever do another one, and the answer is a categoric.
No, I definitely no, but only because, and this comes down to more of an emotional thing actually. So once the deal's done, it's not yours anymore. So the first year was fine, and I was supposed to do 3, I ended up doing 2 years, it was all very amicable. But there's a certain something that changes, it's kind of hard to explain, but once it's someone else's.
It's probably a cultural thing, isn't it?
Very much cultural, yeah. And I spent the first year was trying to sort of, not that the DMGT was trying to meddle, we're actually very good at leading you to it, but there's a lot more kind of things like corporate governance and that sort of stuff. And I spent the first year making sure I protected my team from any of that kind of stuff. In the second year, you thought it was going to happen at some point, it started to kind of come in, but then things change. The sort of stuff you do as a private company, like we used to do lots of weekends away and massive parties, stuff like that. You can't do it anymore, especially if you earn that, because it costs you pretty marvelous. But the thing to think about, when we talk about this, having a plan and being really serious about it is, do you want to do an earnout or not? And actually, if you've got no idea of what the value of your business is, it may dictate that in order to get the value you want, you'll need to do it now. You might not want to leave it. You might be really attached to it. You're not really happy. You might want to stay. It might be a great company you want to work with, and that's fine. But if you don't want to do an earn out, you need a succession plan. So when you can kind of go do the deal and go, here's the MD who's been running the business for the last 2 years. I'm kind of just the chairman, and thanks very much for my name. I'll go. But a lot of people get there and go, I don't want to do an earn out. So, well, can't run a business without you in it. Because if you're not in it, you are the business. And a lot of people who are the principals of a company, they are the business. Take that person out, it just falls to pieces. So working out if you want to do an earn out or not is really, really important. It's not something I particularly gave any thought to until we went through the deal process.
Yeah, sometimes it is unavoidable. The business I mentioned was selling in the States next year. The chief exec was told by our advisors the last couple of days, actually, I was speaking to her last night, that she's going to have to stay for at least a couple of years. And she's fine about that. I mean, although my advice would be we haven't got the management structure in that business. She wants to sell it next year. If she sold it in 3 years' time, it would be a different story. So she's going to have to stay for a couple of years just to build up the existing people into strong enough people to take over that role. Disclosures and warranties. There are certain things that you have to say in documentation known as disclosures and warranties. And Dan's got a very good point about don't put anything in there.
Yeah, this is like a confession. I'm not Catholic or anything, but people know about confession. Father, I had sin, he sort of goes, all right, well, whatever, say a few prayers, and off he goes, son. Unless you've done something really seriously wrong, at which point he's got a massive moral dilemma and probably turns you into the police. Disclosure letters can be like that. So I remember sitting there and I said, all right, here's this bit, I want you to disclose anything that wouldn't be normal course of business. So I thought, what does that mean? It's like, well, things like you've got personal flights through the company, or anything that you've spent company money on that wasn't strictly for the company, and we won't necessarily go into detail. Everybody does this, and there are no taxmen in the room. I don't do anything there is. But if you run a small business that way, you talked about it earlier, the company credit card is yours or the company's, and they get a bit interchangeable. And you've got to kind of fess up. And it was like, what does this mean? Is the deal going to be off? Like, no, they expect it, everyone does this. So you go through those TVs at home, put down a TV, exhibitions, you write it down, and you know that most times looking at it go, fair enough, small business. Don't do anything you don't want to disclose later. I mean, Graham's got a brilliant...
Well, I've had a few. Unfortunately, I can't name names very exactly. Although they're all true stories, I did one of the very early deals I did for TMP. I came across this unnamed asset, which was hundreds of thousands of pounds on the balance sheet, and it turned out to be a yacht, which had never been declared for the private use of the owner of the business. So we didn't do that deal. I also found, you often find property leases, it's quite common for recruitment companies to buy their own buildings and lease them back to the company. That's perfectly acceptable and legal to be owned by the individual owners of the company. But when you find an apartment in Mayfair for the use of a particular lady, which has nothing to do with the business, you think, perhaps a little bit dodgy. So,
I mean, I think that these big buyers honestly don't give a shit about, sort of holidays and nights out, and even, a few things a bit bigger than that. But just if you're not prepared to write it down and put your name to it later on in private with the buyer, don't do it.
And the other one is fictitious employees. If you want to pay yourself more money, I walked away from buying a legal business years ago, where we found a fictitious employee. We couldn't find this person. This person was obviously important because they signed, in those days, photocopier contracts. We had leases for photocopiers and cars that were signed by this particular individual. He got quite a hefty salary. We couldn't find him. It turned out in discussions with the chief exec, finally, that he admitted it was an alter ego of his, so he could pay himself 2 salaries. And at least, needless to say, we didn't do the deal. So if you're going to do something bad, don't try and sell your business. If you're going to do something which you're going to be embarrassed about disclose it early. Don't leave the skeletons in the cupboard and expect that they won't find them, because they will.
Once you've disclosed it, it's in the document, you can't ever come back to it. That's the beauty of it. So it covers things like tax, if you have any tax issues, litigation, problems with staff. If you disclose it, you're in the clear. And they'll ask you to warrant, saying, have you had any staff issues? You'll say no. And if later on they found out they were getting sued in employment tribunal, you haven't disclosed it, that's personal in need. That makes the next point. These are things that can be deal breakers.
It's probably worth having one
It's 7 years.
7 years tax.
Yeah.
2.5 to 2 years.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very the tax anything dodgy did in tax, not paid your VAT, or whatever, that will straight back on you, and you've got no leg to stand up. So, the other thing with deal breakers, I'm going to wrap up shortly, is that not all deal breakers are deal breakers. So someone tells you I'm going to a dying ditch. If someone says it's a deal breaker, nudge them a bit, push them on it a little bit, poke them and just see if it really is a deal breaker. And if you're telling them it's a deal breaker, be sure that it is, because quite often they can really bluff. If you say it's a deal breaker and they say fair enough, walk away, and you really want to do the deal, you go back to them and negotiate their position and shot to pieces. So nudge them, don't say yours is actually deal breaker. And deal breaker could be really anything like you wanting to do an earn out or not wanting to do an earn out. But it might not be financially related, it could be tons of stuff, so you've got to think about what actually you would do the deal and you wouldn't do the deal.
Last couple of minutes, we've got a couple of we've got some handouts which we're not going to give out because we couldn't get them printed in time. But if you want copies of what we think you need to be preparing for things like due diligence, or you need to be preparing, then give us your card afterwards and we'll send you an email with the handouts in it. But one of the points about due diligence, which is extremely important, is get it started early. The queue situation, one of the reasons we were successful in raising the money we raised recently was that the due diligence pack has been prepared from the word go. Every scrap of information about that business is in a pack. It's been running for just over a year when we put this together, and it's that thick physically. It's all available virtually as well, so all the potential investors were able to go straight in there and have a look straight away at what was available. Getting it ready early is extremely important and a very, very valuable tip.
So what we've done is we've got the information bundle. We've taken the headers of everything, so it's from shareholders agreement, articles of association.
Oh, it's not actually the DD from Cube, sorry.
Yeah, it's not the actual, it's a certificate of incorporation, right through to employment contracts, NDAs, cyber transfer, right. Every single piece of paperwork which is signed, or should have signed, someone else signed, the rest of the business is in there, and it's that fat already. It took us months of Broadbean. Fortunately, I was able to stick to my day job while Carol and RFD actually did my due diligence. With the back, people say, oh, we're going to invest in the business or we're going to buy the business, we want to do the due diligence. We just go and have a look at that. Good tips, if you courier it to them 5 o'clock on Friday, we'll just go, good enough.
And lastly, what does a successful exit look like? I did a lot of work with a guy called Andrew Banks, who's one of the most successful people in the recruitment industry globally. And Andrew told me very early on when we were buying businesses at TMP, and bearing in mind we were buying businesses and we wanted the people to stay within those businesses. We weren't paying people out and sending them off the beach. He said that the best, a really successful deal is where both sides walk away feeling mildly disgruntled. So if one side's walking away punching the air, then the other side's usually got their head in the hands. That's not necessarily a good deal for future, if you're going to be working together in the future. As the questioner raised earlier, if you are going to be working together.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're working together, you've got to throw that. But if you're walking away, well, look, the most important thing is having no regrets. That's the biggest fear I have when I'm selling Broadbean is, am I going to regret this? In fact, am I going to regret not doing it? And actually, timing-wise, we did that how we did it. That was time, I'm delighted we did it when we did. But if I sell it, it's gone. You can't get it back. And you've got to have no regrets. You've got to be comfortable with it. I don't necessarily care if they're happy or a bit disgruntled, if no one's unhappy. So if you're going to do it, sit down just before you do it. Once you think about once you've signed it, you feel good in there. You're honest to yourself. You're not going to sit there in 2 weeks wishing that because actually it's not all about the money. I spent after about 2 weeks after I left Broadbean, I was sitting there wondering what the hell was I doing. I was so bored sitting at home. I hadn't actually planned what I was going to do next. I didn't regret selling it, I just kind of regretted not planning what I was going to do next. And it isn't about the money, because it doesn't matter how much money you've got. If you've got no one to come and play with it, everyone else does work, it's kind of benefit. So just make sure that last question just before you sign is, am I going to regret this? No.